This is Ray Stokes in the oral history section of the Health Sciences Library of the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine in Fort Worth. It's my pleasure today, the 6th, I believe it is, day of August, 1986, to be in the office of one of our first graduates who entered in 1970 when the school was first opened, graduated in 1974. I'm in his hometown of Bridgeport, Texas, and it's my pleasure to be visiting with Dr. David Ray. Dr. David Ray is a general practitioner here in his hometown of Bridgeport. And I believe, David, you did open one year. Your first year of practice actually was with one of your one of your peers out at Snyder. You was out there for 1 year.
Yeah, yes, sir. I practiced actually 2 years.
Were you out there for 2 years? Well,
Snyder.
In Snyder. Well, I want you to give me just a little bit of your feelings about, you've been out of school now for, well, more than 10 years. You've been out for 12 years. 12 years. You've been out here now for about 10 years. Let's go back just a little bit. Now, when you were in school, at the time, of course, we were in, there's been a lot of discussion about the bowling alley that we had back on Camp Bowie back in the early 70s. But people keep referring to the bowling alley, but it was called to their attention recently that, it's true, we were in a bowling alley, but our first year was not in a bowling alley. Our first year was in a hospital. And most people lose sight of that particular fact, that if you're going to be born, that's a proper place to be born, and that's actually where the school was born. Do you recall any particular highlight when you were a student that stands out in your mind, whether it be of one of gladness or one of sorrow, one of acceptance or one of regrets, or anything that's kind of foremost?
We had several, to us, interesting events that first year. We, as you say, used the fifth floor of the unfinished fifth floor of the Osteopathic Hospital, Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital at that time, for classrooms and for some of the laboratory work. And we also had a garage apartment across the street, which we used for an anatomy lab, and the cadavers were kept there. And one night, I guess 3 or 4 months into the first year, someone broke into the anatomy lab, and it was interesting to note that nothing was stolen. One of the body bags was open, and that was the end of the robbery.
That was the end of the robbery, yeah.
They checked out of the building rather quickly after that. But, let's see, I don't know so much single events, but I think the thing that stuck in my mind about that first year was of our group of, we started with 20, I believe it was, or 21, and wound up with 18.
Right.
And not only the students, but the students and their wives and some of their children became very close-knit during that time because of the stress we were under, concerned about the school, concerned for our own education, and concerned to pass our work.
Right.
Create a great deal of stress, and I think with stress, folks tend to clump together whenever they can for self-support and support each other. And that seemed to have worked to our benefit during that time, I think.
Dr. David, I had the pleasure recently of reading a critique that you prepared during your freshman year. I don't know what assignment it was by one of the professors who is still there, Dr. Libby Harris, gave it to me recently, and I had enjoyed reading it, and you were rather pointed in your remarks. You were very objective, but you gave your opinion of your first year, what were the strong points and what were the weak points. Can you recall any of can you reflect on that? You're familiar with that particular critique that you prepared.
I can't say that I'm familiar with what's on there. I may even contradict myself.
Oh, yeah.
But I can remember some of the classes and some of the good and bad that came about.
Could you share some of that with us?
A minute ago we were talking about Dr. Graham, who was the physiology instructor.
Right.
And
That's Tom Graham, I believe.
Tom Graham. During his course, several of the students were rather anxious about the instruction there, and they felt like there was a problem with continuity in the course.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed to be jumping about a bit, and some of the students, and I don't recall which ones, but there were some points made about contradictory statements in the class about at times one thing was said and then later that was changed to something else, and that seemed very upsetting at the time. Looking back and looking at things now with a different perspective, and
we've all mellowed a little bit,
yeah.
haven't we?
The importance of some rather highly specific points doesn't seem so great now, but at the time there was so much, again, we're back to this anxiety thing over passing courses, that anything that might cost a person a point on a test created a great stir, and so the questions were held with high regard and with close scrutiny. Anytime there was a difference of opinion as to what was said, there was always plenty of students to come around and say, you know, you said this or you said that, and it put a professor in a hard way. But I think that accounted for some of the conflict that surrounded Dr. Graham at that time. I think he meant well, and I think the man had a good educational background. He would not have been there if he not had a good educational background, because even though we were beginning, the school was trying to make an effort to get people who are...
Yeah, we had to have accreditation.
And so his background and preparation had to be up to certain standards to even be there. I remember Dr. Harris taught microbiology at that time, and I thought she taught well. I guess this is so long ago, I don't have that paper to refer to. It seemed that there was some problem with continuity between her teachings and what lab work we did, simply because of facilities that we had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That would come up as a problem. And I remember I believe Dr. Bennett and Dr. Skinner taught the histology.
Yeah, they were pathologists there at FWH.
In the first year, we only took histology, and they taught that course. And Dr. Skinner, well, I guess both of them. Primarily, Dr. Skinner would read from his notes and teach. And so what he said was very organized. It was very dull, not to hurt his feelings, but there's just so many ways you can say that a cell has this and this within it, and it's shaped as such and such, and it stains with this color and this color, depending on what stains you put in, and so it's rather hard to make that exciting. Dr. Bennett was a much more flamboyant fellow. He would stray from the notes quite frequently, and sometimes critically. He would refer to cases and refer to doctors and say they did this, they did that, and he didn't necessarily agree with that.
I see.
But you know, I'm sure he was very opinionated about what he did, and maybe with good reason. I did not have the medical knowledge at that time to pass judgment on what he was saying anyway, so neither here nor there. But it was interesting, the difference in their two personalities.
You know, Dr. David, I recently heard from one of our graduates who, in a constructive, critical way, mentioned that, and he graduated in 1983, so a little more recent than you, and he was somewhat disappointed because he felt that the school then, and he maintains it may still be their policy now, that there's not enough attention given to the clinical work, as well as as near as much as they do the basic science. When you were there, of course, I guess most emphasis was placed upon basic science more than it was clinical in the very beginning.
Well, I think a couple things have to be brought out when you make that point. Every medical student wants to get to a patient. From the day he arrives, he wants to get to a living, breathing patient.
Yeah.
And this is a continuous pressure, and even when he gets to see his first patient, that wasn't enough. He wanted to do more, and he wanted to see more, and so forth. So that's a never-ending pressure that the student puts on the school. On the other hand, our college and all medical schools that I have any knowledge of has certain basic requirements to get into school that the courses have to be taken prior to entry. And those courses don't include a complete basic science curriculum. They just don't. And this allows people who have majors in English, and majors in history, and majors in whatever else they happen to have majors in, to have minors in enough science to still get into medical school. And this is not just TCOM, it's all medical schools, everyone I know anything about it.
Right.
So that when you do arrive at school, they cannot say, okay, some of you have science degrees, therefore you can skip all this, and the rest of you have to go and take all the basic sciences. They take everybody from the beginning and carry you through a 2-year basic science course, which is rigorous and deep and wide. And it just has to be that way to get you to a point where you have enough basic information to move on into the clinical parts of medicine. At least that's my opinion. And ours was pretty evenly split. The first 2 years were 90% basic science, and very little clinical, but there was a little bit there just to keep interest up. And then from that point on, it was almost entirely clinical. And I think that's not a bad approach. I think if you're going to change it any, it has to be from a standpoint of you can take a little bit of the first year, 2 years, and make them a little more clinical. But then if you do that, you've got to move some of that basic science information into those latter 2 years, so that the total time in either category, I think, still has to stay balanced. I see no way to change that. It's just not fun. You know, but part of medicine that's fun is treating patients. And the other is not fun. It's just a lot of little hard work. Nobody likes to do hard work.
I've had a few experiences in the hospital recently myself, and I get a student doctor coming by wanting to do an H&P on me, you know, and I get a great bang out of the procedure and the process that they go through.
And for him, it's it's the first time, and he's just as excited as Orville Wright jumping in his airplane.
Right. Okay, you graduated now, and you got out into the stark real world of practice. Back in the very beginning at Snyder, any particular experience that you had there in Snyder that's outstanding in your mind and in your practice?
Well, there was many experiences, many of them exciting. The first day I opened practice, I think we were there about 9 days before we went to work, trying to get our home set up and our office set up and whatnot, moved. But anyway, on the first day I went to work in the office, I was placed on call at the hospital covering the emergency room. They had a enthusiasm for doing call about like everybody else does. They wanted to get out of it as quick as they could, so the new guys on the block got to be on call. And the very first night, a Mexican community there in Snyder was having a dance, and I later realized or found out and was told that this was 4 or 5 times every summer they had these things, and every time they had one, they had a shooting. And so it was my night on call and their night to have a dance, and so we had a shooting. And unfortunately, during the shooting, a little 12-year-old girl was shot in the neck, and her outcome was very successful. She did well, as far as that's concerned. But this young lady was brought into the emergency room, and she was actively bleeding when she got there. So I was attempting to maintain her vital signs and control her bleeding, and I asked the local surgeon that we had there to be called, and he was, and he came promptly. And so he said, I'll work on the neck, and you try to do us a cut down on the other end, get us an IV started on this young woman. And that was what I was in the process of doing, and one of the nurses from the OR came in and was assisting Dr. O'Banion, who was the surgeon working there. And she was standing there helping him and said, "Who is that kid down at the end of the table working on this girl?" And O'Banion turned to her and said, "That kid is Dr. Ray." And she said, "Oh," and that was the end of the conversation.
That was the end, wasn't it?
And later I said to her, I told her that we became good friends, and I said, "Look, I'll make you a deal." I said, "You don't call me a kid, and I won't call you an old lady." And, and she said, "That sounds fine to me," so we got along famously after that.
Well, good. Well, that was an experience. Were you looking forward in the beginning to practicing in your hometown, or how'd that come about?
No, I really hadn't made plans to do that. I looked a great many places during my internship to decide where I would locate. And on one occasion, I happened to be back in Dallas for some reason or other. David Wyman and I ran into each other because he was interning at Easttown Osteopathic. And after some discussions,
Now, where did you intern?
At El Paso.
El Paso.
City County.
That's right.
And after some discussions, he said, "Well, why don't you come look at Snyder?" He said, "I'm going to go back there and practice." And said, "I'd like you to come look at my hometown, see what you think of it." And so I made a trip out there and I got to know some of the people, and the situation looked good to me, and I had a great respect for Dr. Wyman, and he was a good friend, and I felt like he and I were compatible as partners. And so we decided to go ahead and do that, and that's how it all came about. But no, there wasn't any plan to come home at that time.
Well, and what developed that caused you to come home? I mean,
there was no real one thing. I think as the 2 years went by that I was in Snyder, I was happy there and treated well. I had no criticism of those folks or that town at all. They're great people. But as the 2 years went by, I found myself coming home to see about my mother and dad quite a lot. And one other event I can point to, Dr. Bryant, who was here local, his son was going through his residency during those years and was accidentally killed at that time. And so I had expected this fellow, David, to come back and locate here. And when that happened, they would have nobody to do that. And I kind of wanted to come home, and mother and dad were here, and need a little more taken care of than usual. And that situation worked out, and so I decided to come back here.
you know, I overheard the nurse when I was waiting a moment ago talking to someone about an emergency came up, and she mentioned the fact that she said our hospital, take him to our hospital, which is in Decatur. Well, that was the first time that, in other words, you don't use a Bridgeport hospital.
No.
You use a Decatur hospital. Anything in particular that
How that came about?
how it came about?
Well, when I came back to Bridgeport, before I made the move, I came to the physicians here in town, 3 local MDs.
3 local MDs, and you were the only DO.
And told them I wanted to come back to Bridgeport. And I've known them for years because I grew up here.
Right.
And I said, I'd like to use your hospital after I open my office. And they said, you'd be welcome in our hospital, and we'd like you to locate in our clinic. And so after some discussion, we decided to do that. And so I did. And the years went by, and after 4 years of being in their clinic, I decided that I wanted to do some things a little differently. And I didn't feel like they'd done me wrong or anything. I had my own style of practicing and managing an office.
So there is a difference, tell me.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
And but it wasn't over those things. There
Right.
was no problem over manipulation or anything like that. But as I developed my ideas to do this, I decided I wanted to build my own office. And so I went to them and told them that this is what I was going to do, and that if they were still in agreement, that I would continue using their hospital. And they had considerable discussions, took about 2 weeks, as I recall. And then on August 28th of that year, 1981 or 81, I guess. Yeah, 81. They asked me to come. It was on Friday evening. I remember it very well. asked me to come and sit with them, and they would tell me what they were going to do. And what they came to tell me was, first they asked me if I would consider changing my mind and staying in the clinic. And I said, no, I'm pretty well committed to what I was going to do. And they said, well, we don't want you to use our hospital anymore, and we also want you to move your things out of our clinic today, or Monday. That was on Friday.
Goodness, that's
So yeah, it was rather
short notice.
And so I did, and I talked to a young lawyer here in town, Mike Simpson, about it. I found out that they were telling my OB practice and my other patients that I had left town. They didn't know where I was. And of course I hadn't left town at all. I just couldn't use their clinic anymore. So my young lawyer friend said, well, we need to get a injunction to stop them from doing that, and also to get you back in the clinic for you to have enough time to at least tell your patients where you are and what your plans are. And so make some arrangements to your OB patients, because they had their care had totally been discontinued. They had no security at all as far as being sure that they would have a doctor to deliver them. So we went through that legal procedure, and he got me back in the clinic, and it was a rather uptight month.
I imagine it was.
Working around those folks, but anyway, I survived it, and they survived it, and the patients then knew where I was. By that time, I was able to get my building at least in order to be able to get over here. And it wasn't finished, but it was adequate so we could work.
Speaking of your building, your present office is located where?
Well, it's 1207 Stevens in Bridgeport, and it's in the home that I grew up in. This home was one built on the site on which a frame house had existed earlier, and that's the house that I grew up in.
But you weren't born here. I think you said you were born in Tulsa and moved here when you were 3 years of age?
3 months.
3 months, excuse me.
So essentially,
yeah,
the entire life has been here. And the frame house was here until 1956, and then my family built this house, this building.
Yeah.
And then whenever we decided to move the clinic over here, we remodeled it and changed a few things. But it's essentially the same structure.
Now, in the 10 years that you've been in practice, Dr. David, and in thinking back on your experiences, when you got your license to practice, did you take the flex?
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't flex at that time, was it?
We still had a combined multiple choice and narrative exam given by the Texas State Board, and that's the exam that I took in Austin.
How long has flex been?
I'm not sure. I think it came about 2 or 3 years after that. It was a very short time after that that it became the Texas exam. It had already been an exam in other states, some other states at that time.
We had a pretty high ratio of failures last year, and of course the apprehension this year is that we're going to be just as bad, and of course everybody's got their fingers crossed.
Pressure's on.
Pressure is on, certainly. But one thing, of course, I realize you don't win today's ball games with yesterday's hits, but one thing that people don't ever seem to recall was that although the last 2 years we did have a, comparably speaking, a higher failure than we would certainly want to have, or possibly should have, but in 1978, 9, and 80, the highest grades scored in the state were by TCOM graduates. But we never hear anything about that, but of course it doesn't do us any good in the year 1986, I'll admit.
I think an interesting point too about that is that the MD students take the national boards, and they take them in parts, and so they're familiar with this type of testing through their years in medical school. And this gives them, in my opinion, gives them an advantage should give them an advantage over the person taking the state board only at the end of his training career.
Well, I don't quite follow you, because you say national boards. Don't the osteopathic graduates take national boards?
Well,
I mean, osteopathic national boards,
yeah,
of course.
but those are put out by the osteopathic board, and they are, I mean, by I believe it's the association between all the schools puts that out.
Right.
And that's a different test from the one the MD national boards are. The MD national boards are, in my understanding, are very similar to the flex. In fact, I think the same people who put it out put the flex out.
I see.
So to me, there's there's a little discrepancy there. It gives them.
What puzzles me is that I understand there are only 2 states in the Union, Louisiana and Texas, that give flex. The rest of them don't.
I wasn't aware of that, but at the time I took the Texas board, some states, not those 2, but some others were given flex already.
Yeah.
And later I understood Texas came along and did it. Apparently, if what you say is true, some of the others have dropped it.
Yeah, they have.
I don't know. It's, of course, examining somebody after 4 years of school is kind of a game anyway, because obviously there's far, far, far too much information divulged in 4 years of school to have any hope of testing accurately over that entire body of information in one test.
And looking back over your experience as a student doctor and then into the profession now for a number of years, do you have any advice that you would project, or any thoughts to direct to any particular future doctors who are current graduates, to whatever experiences that you had that would help them in some way?
Well, I can tell you about an awful lot of mistakes.
Go ahead.
We were talking about advice, and I said that I could tell you about a million mistakes, but I don't know that I don't have any clear-cut advice for them. I think one thing that in tying school to career and looking backward, one thing that sticks in my mind is the stimulus that I got and still do get, remembering the fellows who started the school. To me, that was an awesome effort and act of faith and whatever else you want to label it, on the part of yourself and the gentleman who began. And I think that that'd be a feat hard to match. And I think in becoming a student at TCOM and finishing there and going out and practicing, and any young fellow come along or young lady come along to do it later, when we look at our difficulties or our tribulations or our concern over our education or whatever, I think it behooves us to look back, remember what those men and women did at that time and the circumstances they did it under, and they achieved. And I think that it maybe doesn't excuse inadequacies that may occur, but it helps one keep it in perspective. And we were talking earlier about Ray Olson's comment about school being has to be in constant evolution, and it has to be.
Now, Ray Olson, he taught medicine. Internist, still there.
Yeah, Dr. Ray Olson. And he would often mention about the evolutionary aspect of any educational institution. And I think that is a direct relationship to what these men did, and what these men did permeates the school and carries through these years, and should be looked at and remembered anytime anybody makes any overall comments about the school. To me, just the very idea, I haven't been there that first year, the very idea of starting a medical school from scratch, from zero, is a phenomenal. It's just, like trying to...
I still every now and then have to pinch myself.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah. How can you do that?
And on your particular experience that you had, since you have, one thing I do want to ask you, you are associated with another graduate at TCOM who joined you some 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, John Copeland.
Yes.
I don't know Dr. Copeland as well as I know you. When I was a financial aid officer there, I knew everyone quite well, but now but there's so many now. We have such large graduating classes in the 80s and 90s, and eventually we'll reach 100 till it's rather difficult to know the student doctors like I once did. I know Dr. Copeland, but not nearly as personal as I know you. He's been with you now a number of years.
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah, John has been a very fine associate.
Where is he from? Where's his home? His
He's
background?
from West Texas, out near Lubbock.
Under what circumstances were you able to find John?
Well, after I moved over to this clinic, in the earlier part of the story I mentioned that, and I had been here about 8 months. My practice was overwhelming, and that sounds like I'm bragging, but that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And we had reached the point where we just couldn't handle it, and I couldn't get no time off, and I was getting mired in my work. Much as I liked it, it was more than I wanted to do.
Right.
And so I decided at that time I had to have a partner, and everybody else had already told me that about 3 months before. And I began looking around, and in one of my conversations with Dr. Walker, who's the OB-GYN doctor who at that time was teaching at the college.
You know about Lee Walker? Mm-hmm.
I think he's still teaching.
Yeah, he's still chairman. Well, he's not chairman.
He's in the OB-GYN
He's
department.
still a professor there in OB-GYN.
Well, I happened to be talking to him about a case, I think, at the time, and I said something about my work or how tired I was or something to that effect. And I mentioned, he said, and he started to console me a little bit, and I started telling him that I needed a partner. I was looking around, and he said, well, we've got a young fellow who looks promising and wants to go into general practice, and might be somebody you could talk to, and brought up Dr. Copeland's name. And so I began to investigate, and the more I found out, the more I liked what I found out. And ultimately, I called John personally and talked to him and asked him to come and look at us. He did, and he seemed interested, and so we met a couple more times in Fort Worth, and finally consummated a deal. And he came up here as soon as he finished his internship. And I've been pleased ever since. I hope he is.
Yeah.
He says he is.
Well, good. Well, Dr. David, it certainly has been a pleasure to get to renew an acquaintance, or not renew acquaintance, but get to visit with you again. Because I feel like the class of '74 really belonged to me personally. I just feel like I sired you, so to speak, and I'm very close to the class. And it's my pleasure to come up and visit with you and to get your memoirs on tape, and for posterity, maybe somewhere, sometime down the year 2150, someone might want to know what happened to David Ray or what caused him to get started in the first place. So it's a pleasure to visit with you. This is Ray Stokes from TCOM in the office of Dr. David Ray in Bridgeport, Texas, signing off. Thank you. This is Ray Stokes, some 2 weeks following my interview with Dr. David Ray in his office at Bridgeport, Texas. After returning to my office and looking through some of my artifacts and some of my looking through some of the archives of the school, I found a rather interesting paper that was written by Dr. David Ray. It was given to me to put into the archives of the school, and it's a very lengthy survey that was done by the first class of TCOM in 1970. I have it here in front of me, and I would like to, at this time, just read the cover letter that accompanies this complete survey. I'm quoting Dr. David A. Ray when he was a student in 1970 at TCOM in the first class. Quote, "Subjectivity in evaluations of this type is unavoidable. I realize my opinions are numerous and unsubstantiated throughout this commentary. My hope is that my comments are candid and are to the point. On the whole, I feel that any course inadequacies encountered during this first year were overcome by the personal attention provided by the faculty and by the enormous amount of hard work applied by students and faculty. I also believe that development of standards, instructor maturity, and time will prove effective therapy for student-instructor administration differences. The total evaluation has a definite negative slant. Any stressful situation will elicit memories of the most unsatisfactory events. Also, good happenings are seldom discussed at length by students. Bad happenings are discussed to a degree that memory of them is reinforced. I say this to preface my final remark. I believe in the administration, faculty, and students at TCOM, and that our efforts will eventually be rewarded with a great school. End of quotes. I wanted to put that as an addendum to Dr. Ray's memoirs, and we will be sure that it's included in the total compilation when it's compiled. This is Ray Stokes, August the 18th, 1986, TCOM.